this superb music. Thank you very much.
Après,
well, after this magical moment, we're going to do a lot of to and froing during those 2 days. We'll go from one side of our brain to the other side and back. And now we're going to go into the thinking, reflection, and I'll give the floor to Marc de Smedt. I am very pleased to welcome him here. He's a colleague, he's a friend, he's a colleague and a journalist, writer. He's done a lot of essays. Marc, above all, has a lot of experience, 40 years or even 50 years of meditation, 50 years. May 68 is when I started. Yeah, that was a very good start for a lot of people. And Marc, you saw a lot of big masters. Deschimaru, for example, you spent 11 years with him to follow his teachings and publish for him, be his disciple and also his friend later on. Friend and publisher, so you accompanied a lot of masters for wisdom. You wrote a lot on the wisdom of Zen, giving us back. We need very much to be nurtured by these incisive words of Zen. And Marc is a major publisher also himself. I said he's a colleague. You were the publisher of the magazine Clé. I'm sure that it was a lot of spiritual nurture for a lot of us and human food for us as well. And you publish books in the collection Spiritualité Vivante, among others. So I'll leave you with Marc. Marc is going to present his guests. You'll see Steve Shehan among them, and of course later on you have the floor. So think about a list of your questions. They'd be welcome. Marc, you have the floor. Thank you very much. See you very soon. Hello. Well, as we finish preparing the stage, I wanted to give you a few words of mine. What Kabat-Zinn was saying just now and what the text read by Marion Cotillard yesterday evening, magnificent text of Thich Nhat Hanh, made me think about a metaphor that my master was telling me. It's an Eastern metaphor. He didn't invent it, but he told me to compare meditation with a mountain. When we are starting a state of meditation, we start running around and being worried about things and concentrating on our deep breath. And in Zen, you concentrate. This is a detail which is important. You expire profoundly, going into what the Japanese are talking about, hara, our third brain underneath the belly button. So when you put yourself in this state of meditation, he compares it to a mountain. A mountain, of course, surrounded with clouds, more or less thick clouds, sometimes extremely thick, and you can't see the mountain for the clouds. And those clouds are all our thoughts, our images, our concerns, our worries, everything that is agitating our brain all the time. But fortunately, there's the wind. The wind pushes the clouds away and fragments them and let us see the blue sky. And it is the wind of our inspiration. I think it's a very simple image, a very, very strong image. You see exactly what is the process of what could happen within any meditation whenever it happens. We talked about Q&A sessions later on. Jean-Gérard Bloch did ask us some questions to us speakers, saying, for example, we'll go around the same questions, let's say. Did we always meditate? Yes, I believe that the human being, since he was thinking, was looking for sense to his life. And even in the Western world, since Socrates that was taking up the sayings from Delphi, no know yourself, and then you'll know the universe and the gods. And Montaigne said that the spirit of man slips out always, and Descartes was also saying incredibly that there is a consciousness of awareness within us all. The only difference, and that's the second question from Gérard. Gérard was asking, what are the major traditions of the Orient and Occident teaching us? They give us, in their own way, their own philosophies. They teach them. But of course, the big difference there is that we could not invent what the Greeks of Alexander the Great said, the gymnastics of Sophia, of wisdom. And that's very important. We see that back coming. That's one of the good sides of globalization, is that we now discover much more easily the Orients, and John Kabat-Zinn could digest it so very, very well for us, and others did as well, for the great benefit of our own crisis nowadays, because I think it's a major luck for the Western world and humankind generally to find back the path to this universe of meditation. We talk a lot about pollution, but we don't talk about this psychic pollution. But the only way of getting rid of the psychological pollution is to go through meditation. And then the third question, how are these teachings modern in our modern societies? They are incredibly modern, and the proof of it is we talked about what happened 50 years ago. Indeed, there practically wouldn't have been anybody here in this room. And in Paris, for example, around Paris, there were 3 small yoga courses and nothing practically in the rest of France. And now you can see popular wisdom means that there is a huge demand, means that you are here sitting in this room today. Now, the last question that was asked, does meditation allow us to go from dogmatic ethics to an incarnate ethic? Yes, I believe so. This is the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We all have the worst and the best of mankind in ourselves, and meditation helps us to appear everything that is much better in ourselves and embody profoundly an ethics. Now I'm going to ask my companions to come and join me on stage, please. Can you come and take your seats, please? Benoit Billot, Martine Batchelor, and our friend the musician, and I shall sit here. I'll introduce them very quickly to you. I mustn't lose my notes and make a mistake here. Martine Batchelor, I'll start with you. You have been a Zen nun for 10 years in Korea. Then you studied mindfulness in Germany? In England, sorry, it was in England. And then now you teach. A spiritual teacher, and you teach meditation to seniors, OAPs, in a scientific experiment that will probably broach during a roundtable tomorrow morning. You wrote a lot of books meeting remarkable women. Father Benoit Billot did some superior vegetable biology studies. In 1963, he became Benedictine monk, became a priest, spiritual companion, and he founded the Maison de Toby, which tries to reconcile the different spiritual traditions of the whole world. He practiced Zen for 2 years in Germany under the mastership of a very great Zen master who allowed him to reteach this tradition in his own Christianity, and he wrote a few books. Among them, a book with a very interesting title, How Can You Be Christian? in Relier Publishers, and the reviews in the La Vie magazines in Mediapol, Lumière de l'éternel du jour. Michel Bitbol, now you are a researcher, you are a philosopher, you have a prestigious award of the Academy of Sciences for your book on quantum mechanics, and you're fascinated by the relationships between science and Buddhism. You have your last book, Does Conscience Has an Origin, and that's in Flammarion. And then finally, of course, I don't present again our musician friend who was wonderful just now, a few minutes ago. And then finally, Matthieu Ricard, who unfortunately couldn't be among us today at this roundtable, but specifically recorded for us video. He's a doctor in cellular cell science. He's a Buddhist monk, of course, you know. He is a friend of Dalai Lama. He wrote a small book that you all know, The Art of Meditation, and so many more books as well. So we're going to listen to the video of our friend Matthieu. Dear friends, I'm very sorry not to be among you, but it's sure that the theme that we have to look at in those days is how to have an alliance between science, art, and meditation is very interesting. Science, well, personally, I'm a scientist by training. I think that it is an approach, rigorous investigation of reality. Well, of course, traditionally, science, physical, biological sciences are there to study, detect, measure, try and understand external phenomena that are detectable, measurable, visible. And then there's another science, of course, in the psychology in the Western world, but also 2,500 years of contemplative science in Buddhism, which applies the same approach, empirical, pragmatic approach to the mechanisms of the mind. How do the thoughts chain up? How do they shackle us up sometimes? What are basic emotions? How do they function? How can we distinguish the emotions which are going to nurture our feeling of well-being or fulfillment, and how are the ones which are hindering our wholeness when we're trying to find fulfillment and wholeness? The science of mechanisms of the mind. It's a point of view. You can have a hypothesis. They are not checked out, so you abandon them. You go for another theory, another approach. It's an approach which enables us to try in a certain way to reach an optimum state of mind, to compensate our different sufferings and fulfill our lives. And necessarily it's a pragmatic, empirical approach, because if it doesn't work, we're going to abandon it, because otherwise it's going to increase our stress, our jealousy, our anger, and then we'll abandon it. So from a certain point of view, it's a pragmatic approach to the mechanisms of happiness and suffering. So science is implied to the mechanisms of happiness and suffering, what we call, in fact, meditation. Well, in fact, meditation, what is it? According to the root words in Sanskrit and Tibetan words, it means, first of all, cultivate, nurture the qualities which are there potentially within all of us: reading, writing, learning to play chess, sports, piano, or to be more altruistic, selfless, mindful, have a freedom inside, and combine all those qualities and develop them so that that contributes to what we call a state of fulfilled well-being. And then to combine all of those qualities in ourselves to enable us to survive in our existence. That's cultivate our qualities. The second approach is to familiarize ourselves with a new way of being. In other words, the way that we translate external circumstances, good or bad, in well-being or ill at ease. I can be in a paradise but can be totally depressed about it, or I can face bad circumstances and keep my resilience, keep my strength, keep my well-being. This is resilience that you can practice, and it is a science. because it answers some rules. You don't do just about anything. There are some rules, things that have to be avoided, things that have to be practiced. It's not just that we wish it, that we attain. We have a scientific side, we have a meditation, a familiarization, cultivating our spirit. And what does art has anything to do with that? Well, it's very important to say that art, in fact, is a creative mode, creativity. Studies in neuroscience recently, notably done by Scott Barrick Hoffman, American neuroscientist, very well known, did show up that the faculty to focus, give attention on something, to focalize entirely your attention on something would activate, trigger some neuronal networks which are very different from the ones which are activated when you're in a creative mode. The creativity is more when you're taking a walk in a forest. You're not distracted necessarily, but you are open up, you are available. When you wake up early in the morning, you're not totally concentrated on one particular task, and very often the ideas, decisions, the artistic ideas are coming through you, and it's very important. Because finally, it goes from the triggering of totally different brain zones which are in competition. So you can't be totally focused on something and also creative. So it has some interesting, I think, repercussions through art. And then, from the point of view of the world in which I live and from which I come, Buddhism in Tibet, art is not destined to fire up our emotions. It could be music, for example, contemporary music that fires us up, or some artistic modes that want to exalt our emotions. But on the contrary, art wants to free us from our negative emotions, animosity, jealousy, anguish, anger, and free our spirit from all of those perturbing, disturbing emotions. So we talk about sacred art, which is integrated in spiritual path, going from confusion of the mind to knowledge, and going from experience of sources of suffering or even addiction to sources of suffering to liberation from those sources of suffering. So you have sacred paintings which are looking at a support for meditation, deity which symbolizes through their attributes, their aspects, compassion or knowledge, awareness, qualities for enlightenment, or sacred dance, which is a meditation through dance, which is also a symbolic sense to help us think about our spiritual path. Sacred music, instead of firing up the spirits, you calm the senses. Sometimes music that lasts for days, sometimes a whole week, to calm down spirits considerably and calm us all down. So this is true that in traditional spiritual societies, art is integrated into the spiritual path, which is not always the case in the Western world. Personally, I don't know if you can call me an artist, I'm a photographer. Some very often have asked me if photography for me is a form of meditation. Well, I must say that unfortunately I think it's more a form of distraction. I happened to do a photo album, A Motionless Journey. For 1 year I was in a hermitage facing Himalayas, and there were 80 wonderful times in that year when there was a totally magic light. It was 6 a.m. in the morning, or moonrise at 3 a.m., or sunset over the Annapurna that I see 50 kilometers away from me, and they are lasting about 20 seconds because the light changes very, very quickly, and you had to really capture this instant. And as Cartier-Bresson was saying, a photography is neither taken or seized by force. It is the photo that takes us, and it's a kind of creation, of course, because we want to render the beauty that we have witnessed. And that being said, for the person who is a photographer, it's a little bit of a distraction. Fortunately, it doesn't happen very often. Those magic moments are about twice a week or once a fortnight, so we can accept those minor perturbations. This is a very small parenthesis on what is to do with the relation to the artistic world of photography and meditation. So here are some of my thoughts, and I think that we can easily and in a very fruitful way, we can ally a scientific approach, which means intellectual rigorousness, don't accept just about anything that comes along, to another approach that was a meditative approach that wants to be a better human person and to contribute to share the inner beauty of humankind through a portrait, for example, in photography, and the wondrum in front of nature, the nature that we want so much to protect these days. And from that point of view, art can serve our inspiration so that we can become aware that we need to protect this planet. It is high time to protect this planet. And we are 7 billion human beings now. We have a common humanity. It is not the time now for dictators, despots, or people who hang on to power through religion, politics, or any other form of influence on others. It is the voice of 7 billion people that have to be heard right now. So everything means that finally, becoming a better human being, what does it mean? Is the better way to serve our fellow human beings, and therefore to combine the understanding of the mechanisms of the changing of our world, our nature, through science, inspiration through art, to appreciate the inner beauty fundamentally of mankind, animals, and world and nature, and meditation that integrates all of this together and brings us to this understanding and these inequalities to an optimum level, so that later on this integration can be translated into action in the service of others. So we transform ourselves to better transform the world and better serve our fellow human beings. It seems to me a good way of combining science, art, and meditation.
Now, fortunately, there is distraction sometimes when you meditate. Look at the pictures shown to us, how beautiful they were during the meditation practice of John and Jean Girard. So these photographs also make us meditate. Let's turn to Michel. Let's get started. Well, my task today is to show you the link between phenomenology and meditation. Why this relationship? Well, the first is a philosophical subject matter, discursive, talkative type of practice. Now, logos is one of the words, means discourse, the word, and phenomenon means an apparition, something that appears. Therefore, this phenomenon means also light. And then we have meditation. Phenomenology is not just a philosophical subject matter. It is also a matter that presupposes a practice, a behavior, an inner change. And it is in that way that I believe that phenomenology is one tradition of Western wisdom. It's not a very ancient one, yet a very important one. This is also why I believe that phenomenology is the best, or one of the best bridges bridges possible between the discourse, the narrative on the human being, which is typical of the Western, and the opening up, which is typical of the Eastern, Asian practice. Francisco Varela was saying that this is a way of thinking introduced by Husserl in the Western world, a style of thinking, a way of thinking, a way of being, a way of living, a way of opening up. This kind of thinking and being was therefore introduced by a German philosopher called Edmund Husserl. Many people succeeded him. You can see them on the screen. In France, we have some star phenomenologists, Jean-Paul Sartre, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, or Emmanuel Levinas. I noticed that something is missing. It doesn't matter, really. Now, Francisco Varela, what does phenomenology mean? It's a return to the world as it is experienced in its felt immediacy. Return. Why return? Well, because we tried to find this truth somewhere. It wasn't very far. It's important to observe that return. Now, I don't know why we can't see the quotation. The difference between phenomenology and science is that phenomenology focuses on the experience, on the landscape of experience, whereas in the second case, we draw up a map of that experience. So the difference is being in that landscape, exploring it, discovering it, or getting out of that landscape to map it. Now, here again, there's some elements missing on screen. You can't see the definitions of the two fundamental words I want to focus on. The crucial word, one or two crucial words to clarify the situation. The essential word in practice when it comes to phenomenology is a Greek word, epoche. Epoche is a word that was used a long time ago, some 2,500 years ago, by the Greek scepticists. Pyrrho, for instance, was one of them, very influenced by India and Buddhism, by their trips to India. You can see them on screen now, and influenced by Stoicism. Epoche is usually translated by stoppage, suspension of judgments. That doesn't mean we eliminate thoughts and judgments. No, we let them be as they are, and we only treat them as they are, thoughts and judgments. We stop clinging to them in order to be with them. I'm not just saying to look at them, because looking at them would mean we look at them from a distance. No, we are truly with them. And the word epoche is of the same meaning as nirodha, a Sanskrit word, which also means stopping, suspending. You can see that in the third noble truth of Buddhism in Yoga Sutra. Now, as I said, this is very important, to put an end to judgments, but that doesn't mean you get rid of them, you eliminate them. You simply dive into them, live with them and in those judgments. And this is what we mean when we say that we have to have access to awareness, transcendental awareness, something that you don't observe. I put the word on screen. It seems very abstract and obscure, simply to tell you that it is something very familiar. To transcend means exceed, go beyond ordinary experience, go beyond what is apparent, try and find the reasons, try and find God as the creator, go further. Transcendental is the opposite. It's something that is so close that you can't see it. And the best definition was given 800 years before our era by Pradaranyaka Upanishad 3. Now, usually it's the Brahman we're talking about when we say he. He is never seen, but he is the seer. He is never known, but he is the all-knowing. This is what we mean by transcendental conscience, and Husserl talks about that. Now, I insist a lot on consciousness, on mindfulness. How can you put an end to judging? That leads us to think about idealism, a Western thought. This too brings us closer to Chittamatra, a Buddhist doctrine that is well known, where we focus on the mind and the awareness. Now, I quoted Shantara-Ksita, a Buddhist, an Indian Buddhist, and Husserl. Husserl says there's no nature, except in as far as it is made up of a consciousness-based process. And Shantara-Ksita says external things do not exist. There's nothing besides the mind in different ways. Now, that is a dualistic way of thinking. That is not what Husserl or Shantara-Ksita say. Husserl says idealism is not a metaphysical construction. It is the only possible and absolute truth of a human being focusing on their own doing. Now, look at our own condition. There are no tables, chairs, and loudspeakers. There's the experience of tables, chairs, and loudspeakers that you find. And this is what we stand on. Now, idealism, Husserl talks about idealism. It's not a metaphysical construction, but the only possible and absolute truth of a human being focusing on what his own doing means. Now, Shantara-Ksita says the power of intelligence has its limits. In some cases, we have to follow the path of seeing, in other words, inner silence and observation. This type of idealism is not a narrative. It's the observation of the absolute starting point of any search for awareness and mindfulness. As I said, the first condition characterizing phenomenology is a spiritual practice. It involves self-transformation, which can be compared to religious conversion, as Edmund Husserl said. And Eugen Fink said the very foundation of a philosophy is the making of the philosopher. In other words, what is at the basis of your living, of your life? When you answer that question, you can become a philosopher. This is what Husserl understood very well in 1924. This creator of phenomenology received a book, the Buddhist Sutra, and he was asked to read that book and possibly to draw up a preface. He read the book and he was absolutely amazed because he recognized in that book his own philosophy, which had already been developed 2,000 years before him. Now, Buddhism is certainly the best flower of Indian religious practice. It looks purely inside. It focuses on what is the closest to us. It contains a method for the highest dignity to purify and pacify our mind. It's a thought and practiced method. It is very consistent. It's an energy. It's a purity of the mind which have no equivalent. And that goes to show how Eastern and Western practices can be combined when it comes to major traditions of wisdom we're talking about here. Thank you so much. That was extremely clear. Let me just add that Francesco Varela, who was quoted on many occasions during this presentation, was the scientist who virtually initiated research with the Dalai Lama. And this led to a host of studies, some involving Matthieu Ricard. He was one of those who initiated this type of research. Benoit Billot, Father Benoit Billot, He's going to be the next speaker. He's going to tell us more about the place of the world meditation in our Christian traditions. First, a word about the etymology of meditation and meditate. There's a Latin word, medere, a verb that means to care, to look after your body. Medere, which led to medicine, médecin, the physician in French, etc. Later on, when focusing on this interior presence, there's a second word that was derived from the third, meditare. Meditare, how can we translate that? We could say to look after our inner person, interiority. In other words, be at ease, be happy as you are. And the second meaning, which was developed a little later, could be to look after one's mind or spirit, one's soul. When I say the soul, I don't mean the soul as many psychologists consider it today. It is simply the human being's psychology, but I also consider this in the traditional meaning of the word. In other words, what is essential, that means why I'm a human being related to others. It's transcendental again, as Michel called it. So this is the meaning of this word, meditation. All this shows that it is a very well-known word in the Western world. It is used in different contexts. Why should one look after one's soul? Well, simply because you need to meet this soul, you have to nurture it. We nurture our body, our intelligence, our relationships, our knowledge, but we also have to nurture our soul. If you open it up, in Zen Buddhism, I'm very familiar with, we talk about the nature of the human being. You have to open it up to the divine source, to God. The word God is very charged in our culture, so it's difficult to use that word all the time. You have to use metaphors, the sacred origin, for instance, and you also have to open up to others in developing love and compassion. What gives you the impression of being linked to others, related to others? What Thich Nhat Hanh called, very interestingly, the interbeing. In our relationship to the cosmos, there is also that tie. And when I say we need to nurture our soul, we also have to become more aware that we have to give some meaning to life. Sometimes we have the feeling of being constantly accompanied, but there's also the emergence of creativity. Sometimes we have to go through different stages of wakefulness to lead a well-aware and mindful life. Now, in Christian traditions, how does meditation translate practically? I'll give you a few examples, amongst others. In Luke chapter 2, it is said that Mary was meditating over events in her heart. What events? The angel visiting her, the birth of the divine child, his first steps, and then his visit to the Temple of Jerusalem. She was pondering over these events in her heart, therefore meditating. So the Virgin Mary, the Mother of Christ, seemed to be destabilized and worried by these events. She was therefore meditating over these events in the presence of God to get over this phenomenon. This is a rather consistent type of meditation. We ponder over the events of our lives. In Saint Ignatius's tradition today, it is well embodied, as well as in other cases where you need spiritual support. Another example would be that of the fathers of the Egyptian desert. After the decision taken by Constantine, many men and women left their homes, left their families and their jobs, and moved into hermitages, into the desert of Egypt and Palestine. Usually they lived on their own in a grotto, a little hut they had erected. They used to live near a master, a teacher. They would go and follow his teachings and open up their heart to him. They would be craftsmen. They would make baskets and go and sell them in villages, and they constantly prayed. So their hands worked. This is also true today for Christians, and they worked on their inner self. They constantly prayed, and that prayer was often the repetition of a sacred word, Abba, or Father, or my God. And they would breathe out when saying that word, and the most sacred word, Jesus. They would say it in Aramean, Yoshua, breathing out. Or another Aramean word that you can find in the Apocalypse that means come, Lord, Maranatha. And this led to the Hesychast tradition, which still exists today, and to Christian meditation too, as it was initiated by Lawrence Freeman and John Main, who have just created their center near Poitiers. Another example as regards monks, not the fathers of the desert, but monks who live in a congregation, the Lectio Divina. In other words, meditative reading of sacred texts, particularly the Bible. This type of reading is a legacy of the main Jewish tradition. According to Saint Benedict and his rule, written in the 6th century, the word meditation recalls two other words. Memorization, because you have to learn by heart, particularly at a time when people who knew how to read and write were rare. You had to learn passages of the Bible by heart, and some people had this knowledge of the First and Second Testament of the Bible. And the other word this brings about is brooding. In other words, when you look at cattle in our fields, they represent a symbol recalling the practice of Lectio Divina. You take in and ponder, you absorb and think about what you've learned. And this is what monks do. they meditate and ponder over biblical extracts. This is still a very lively tradition in most monasteries. It is slightly forgotten in the Christian tradition, but it is still very present in other traditions, in the Catholic Church, for instance. I speak on behalf of the Catholic Church, as you may have understood, but as regards the Protestant Church and the Orthodox Churches, the same applies. Another example, Master Eckhart, between the 14th and the 15th century, he famously said that man should become really poor. He said that mankind should become genuinely poor, and then when you're genuinely poor, when there is spiritual poverty, and this is very important, if mankind does not want anything, he will not know anything and not desire anything. In other words, you learn to remain quiet, to be less agitated, you tame your desires. And your inner life is getting rid of these disturbances. They open up an inner space in which the divine can be present. A human being may feel the impulses, what Graf Durkheim called the inner master. This is how the inner master can take shape and establish a dialogue with the ego, directing it slowly, without being violent, without wanting to get rid of it, but putting it at the service of a divine desire, beyond any human desire. Thank you so much, Benoit.
C'est la preuve que la recherche du dépouillement et du silence intérieur.
Well, that shows that inner silence and meditation is not typical of the East only. You mentioned Master Eckhart, and I think that he is famous for other very strong words. Now I'll give the floor to Martine Batchelor. We'll talk about a more secular type of spirituality. You don't have to practice religion to be interested in meditation. Well, to wind up this round table, I would like to focus on the different principles governing meditation. Now, this is based on Buddhist meditation, but I wonder why mindfulness, why meditation can have such an impact in the medical area. I think it is also because it is fairly common, accessible to a lot of people, and it will work in a way. Why would one meditate if there are no results? So I suppose people meditate because they gain something out of it. Now, I would like to focus on the mechanism of meditation that may be applied in a very different way. What I would like to talk about is this. I'd like to talk about the two qualities we're going to cultivate, practice, and develop when we meditate. The first of these qualities will be focusing, focus, concentration. Marion Cotillard read a text yesterday by Thich Nhat Hanh. John Kabat-Zinn talked about it too. Let's take one object, breathing, but you can take the body, sounds, benevolent sentences, etc. But what matters here, it's not breathing itself that is sacred, it is simply here. We're going to use breathing as an anchoring point, like the anchor of a boat. Your boat is anchored somewhere, but because it is anchored, it will not touch other boats and break them or be broken itself, and it will not drift away on the ocean. So in the same way, when you practice meditation, you will come back to breathing. Breathing will be your anchoring point. It will not prevent you from thinking. But each time you come back to breathing, what happens? There are 4 things that happen. This is why meditation is so efficient. Firstly, we're not going to nurture our habits, physical, emotional habits. No. Generally, what do? We have one function to imagine, to plan, to be happy, to be sad, etc. But this becomes automatic, almost like a habit. So when you sit down and meditate, you usually notice that you don't have very many creative thoughts. You'll think, oh, I thought about this already. So when you come back into meditation, you don't nurture your habits. It decreases their power and it brings you back to the creativity of that function. You don't meditate because you don't want to think. You want to bring your thoughts, your emotions and feelings and sensations back to their creative functions. What else do? When you focus on breathing again, you don't just focus on your breath, on breathing. You come back to what happens here and now. So that's a more general overview of the situation. If you're lost in an emotion, in a sensation, in a feeling, in a thought, you're not really here. You're not really present. Let's try this out. You're sitting down in a room. Outside, it's raining heavily. It's very noisy. But if you think about something else, you can't hear that rain fall. You focus back on your breathing and you can hear the rain again. So when I talk about being anchored, this is what I mean. We come back to this creative function, to everything that happens here and now. And this will enable us to be calmer and to have more space. Then there's a second quality or ability that is very important. The vipassana, in other words, the observation, the experimental observation. What are we going to challenge? What are we going to observe? First, we're going to observe something very simple, that is that things change, things evolve. Night and day, things and thoughts evolve. But do we live according to these changes? Usually not. Now, we have this function of generalization that becomes automatic. Then something happens and people say, oh, it's always like that. I'll never be like that. And we say to other people, you're always like that. You will never change. That is not necessarily very kind to say to someone, you will never change. I will never change. So in other words, when you meditate, what you're trying to do is that you're trying to experience the granularity of these feelings, these micro feelings. You're going to try and feel them, understand them. I hope you're not allergic, you don't suffer from dermatitis, but let's say you feel something in your cheek, something scratches you, something irritates you, but you're not going to scratch yourself because you're sat down meditating. So you're going inside that feeling that is going to be very intense, and because it is very intense, you will think it'll last forever, or at least for an hour. How am I going to manage when I feel this need to scratch myself? And Marion Cotillard said, what am I going to do? I'll be bored for these 3 months. Now, if you go inside that experience, it is a very intense one. And then all of a sudden, it disappears. It's no longer there. So it's interesting. You think it is always going to be there. All of a sudden it disappears and it's no longer there at all. And that can really help us in our daily lives. When you feel something, you always wonder how long it is going to last. Will it last a very short time? Will it happen because certain conditions are met for it to happen? We're angry, we're sad, etc. We're not always sad, we're not always angry, but sometimes we are in certain conditions. And this is why we're interested in experimental observation. I think I've come to the end of the time allocated to me. So very quickly, I would like to say that this experimental research will enable us to be more open-minded, to see things clearly. If you're quiet, if you have that openness of mind, you will be able to develop creative mindfulness and awareness that can then manifest in daily life through wisdom and compassion. In other words, meditation can be seen as a way in which you dissolve, you do away with all these obstacles to our creativeness, wisdom and compassion.
Merci beaucoup, Martine.
Thank you very much indeed. I do hope this round table, well, it was a little difficult because we all had to intervene 10 minutes to speak about such rich issues. And thank you for having spoken at length about this. What about your reaction to all this? Everything has been said. I can only help myself. It's so inspiring. It includes everything that I feel, I desire, that inspire me. So the time, the moment, empathy, the emptiness, vacuum, going beyond oneself when communicating, mindfulness, in creativity. So I am nourished for a long time by what you've said, by what you have referred to. It's a lot of things that you've said that affect me. I'm discovering paths of research through instruments that create links that I try to trigger, to activate. And these links at times make me think light rays. I wanted to say that Matthieu Ricard was like a whirling dervish because he has enlightened us. So I heard things that will lead me to create more, to be more creative. It has opened doors, and I will certainly carry on. I'm very moved, in fact. I'm very moved, and I'm extremely happy to be here, and thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Et merci pour votre...
Well, thank you very much for your truly meditative music. We had a wonderful time listening to it. So we said that we would have time for questions. I don't know how things are organized. Will you have microphones? Because we can't really see the audience from up here. Master Dogen, who brought the practice of Zen to Japan, he brought it from China to Japan, where Zen means meditation, and Zazen is sitting meditation. And meditation is a light that you have in darkness, a light in the darkness. Ah, I can see you now. Now, I don't know whether we have mobile microphones, but if you would like to put questions to our guests, brief questions, please, because we have exactly 20 minutes, just after midday. So do not hesitate. If you have any questions, please go ahead. And if there are no questions, then we will carry on the discussion amongst ourselves.
Ah. Attendez, alors là, on n'entend vraiment rien.
We can't hear anything, says the speaker.
Ah, s'il vous plaît.
Right, there are 2 microphones here and there, just near the front rows, and if you can walk to the microphone, please do so. I'm sorry, I didn't know about this.
To the lady, please, if you can explore the question how meditation develops the creative function, comme la méditation développer la fonction créative, s'il vous plaît.
Voilà, merci.
Alors, la façon dont je verrai la fonction créative.
The way I perceive the creative function, when we talk about creativity, you can repeat the same thing, but creativity is you're going to create something, something new here and now by responding to what is happening here and now. So I would see meditation as something that will get rid of the automatic pilot, and so you can become more creative, more imaginative, you can plan more, you can reflect, you can think, you can be happy or angry. That is also a function. So if the automatic reflexes disappear, it's not that you suddenly have a dark vacuum, but it is a possibility for us to use our creativity and to react to what is happening here and now. Because what does often happen? You're going to react in relation to the past or something that has happened. But now we want to be here and now with what is happening now. And the best way of doing that is by having meditative listening. What happens when you listen to somebody? You want the person to stop so you can say something. So when that person asks you something, you haven't really listened, so you don't react. So that's not helpful. But if you are all there and you listen to that person here and now, when the person stops, you are going to answer in a creative way that will often surprise us, because you will be saying something so appropriate for what is happening here and now. I entirely agree with the here and now, but very often the creative function, or what creates creativity for the here and now, will be fueled by what happened before or which will come in the future. Yes, indeed. But if you cultivate the muscle of meditation, you have to cultivate the muscle of meditation, because very often habit will be stronger than meditation. So habits are a trap. So what we want to do is to develop the power of creative awareness. And it's not something that will just suddenly happen. When you play music, I say, if I had all these instruments, I would do the same thing. But of course not, I can't. You do what you do because for 20 or 30 or 40 years, you played music, and you can have this creative moment, like your singer was absolutely wonderful. His creative potential was incredible, and but this morning he didn't suddenly decide to sing. He has been practicing for a long time, but with that organ he has, once he's worked on it, he can be creative. Thank you. Another way of talking about creativity and linked to meditation, think of what François Rostand talks about hypnotism, generalized wakefulness. It is a state of conscience where you are silent and you're listening to all the murmurs that you never hear when you are in your habits. So things will surface, and then when they are heard, then they are captured by thought, and thought then transforms that in a creative power. And I think that is the process. Yes, indeed, there are so many mechanisms, and meditation brings forward a certain freshness that allows for creativity. Yes, good morning. I would like to put the following question. Are the participants, or could the participants to this roundtable could tell us something so that young generations will move towards meditation? Because in our daily life, it seems to me that those who are 15 years of age and more are live in such a noisy environment, and they're light years away from what calm, or attracted by calm. Well, there is a whole, thank you very much for your question to start with, but there is a whole evolution, and Frédéric Lenoir is also dealing with this in schools and elsewhere. There's a whole movement to develop meditation techniques which are not called meditation, and to introduce that in schools, and it works very well. Children who are so tense, if they get suggested games on the basis of silence, for example, children suffer a lot of stomach aches because of the frenetic rate at which they live. But if they realize that they can calm themselves down, then they are attracted to that. And I have quite a few examples. May I just add something? Could I say that young people will be interested by different things, and now from those from 18 to 30, they will be interested in apps. And in fact, there are meditation apps where people with their mobile phones will get a whole system that will allow them to meditate. I know quite a lot of young people who meditate thanks to apps, and then they come to retreats afterwards. So thank you very much. Another question. I have a question on waiting, because without waiting I cannot made it, or expectations. And you said that one should not have expectations. How can one manage the expectation of the practitioner? So what are the good things that one can draw from meditation? No, why do I meditate if I should have no expectations? And when I practice it, I should have no expectations. Well, I will rapidly answer that question. It's true, when you practice meditation, there is a difference between what you call breathing in, breathing out, and a specific expectation. No, you're not going to practice for golf and you're going to have meditation. No, you practice meditation because you are inspired by it. You want to develop wisdom, clarity, or what have you. But so if you're inspired, it will give you a direction. It will give you an impetus to move towards something. It will require energy. But it's not going to be very specific. I will become compassionate in such and such a way. But you're going to move towards something and you're going to develop something. But if you have expectations, it means that I expect something specific. So I will practice meditation and I observe my breathing, but then afterwards, what do I do? Am I going to concentrate on my breathing, or after 1 minute I check what is the effect of meditation on me and see whether I'm calm? So that is the expectation. And of course, you have to be inspired by that. But expectation, the more you have expectations, the more you will get tense because you will not obtain it. And very often in meditation, nothing much happens. But what is interesting is, does it change your behavior in your daily life? With Steve Brudel, the singer who accompanied me, we always meditate, but we don't expect anything. We take a risk. We are in concentration and bodily communication. So without any expectations, it's something that nourishes us. And we can have duets on the piano, or we play other type of music, and it's something which is very enriching. So you don't need to have expectations, just be in the moment, and then you feel you reach an exalted state. Yes, I wanted to speak about the singer that moved me greatly, and I wanted to ask you, does he improvise, or is it prepared? Well, we've been working together for a few years, and exactly in this fashion, we try to express emotion that goes beyond words. But of course, we also work on texts and poetry texts. But Steve has taught me a word that is called gromlo. It's singing improvisation. So what we try to do is to use lyrical style of singing and try to capture emotions. And we want to go beyond something that would guide us too much. So we are in an emotion, in a feeling, which is not defined in a language or anything, but you can hear this voice, which is very lyrical. It is improvised. Sometimes we work on very clear musical scores, but there is also a lot of improvisation in what we do. So we were nourished by you today, the fact of being here, why being here. So we improvised on the basis of something which was very clear, like the frog. But at any rate, it works well. At least we think it does.
And it's true that the silence in the room is very important. A concert player told me that the silence in the room is so heavy, you have to lift it up so that you can concentrate and connect with your audience. And sometimes it is even so light that you take flight practically. What's your question? My question is about energy and practice of meditation. How can meditation consciously help us to channel, bring to us some spiritual, subtle energies that will help us transform and go into this transcendental state that you mentioned? The word energy can have a few dimensions in an inner practice, and I wanted to find out what space you give it to this energy. I'll give the floor to Benoit particularly on that, but you are here in expectations again. Meditation is an act, is a creation, and you have to really be immersed in it. Well, I've been meditating for 25 years now, and for the practices of heart coherence, I think that I was wondering about that, how it would work. Benoit. There is a kind of energy that goes through the whole of the cosmos, space and the earth, each humankind and each real being. This comes from elsewhere, nobody knows where from. All religious traditions recognize that it comes from a transcendental state, infinite, what we would call God. In the Christian tradition we call it, and the Jews call it ruach. It's a breath, divine breath, spiritus, spirit in French, in our Latin languages, and this energy is available. When I'm not closed up on my own doings, on my own organizing, my own existence, what I'm going to do in a few minutes' time, what I did yesterday, when I'm opening up quietly to everything that can happen, that will happen, then I become a receiving equipment for this energy that has many names according to the traditions. And it does inspire life. Martine just now talked about inspiration and aspiration. She breathes in and therefore she has an aspiration from it. So there is something that is very creative in this energy, and when it is welcomed into the inner self, creates something, a creative life within them. Absolutely. I had my Zen master who said we shouldn't think about that too much. The benefits, the transformations of medication come automatically without us thinking about it. Something that will nurture you very deeply and in a relatively simple way, should I say. Well, one way that we could look at this question is the following. How do we use our energy? What for? If we are thinking a lot about things, we use a lot of the energy, and then maybe tomorrow the scientists will talk about it. When we use all of this energy in our brains to think, etc., if we reduce the level of thoughts, but then we have more creative thoughts, then we're going to have more energy to do something else. In this other way, if we put all of this energy into trying to protect ourselves in order to be more limited within ourselves, then the energy is not going to be opened up to the others. But if you start to dissolve this sort of selfishness, then we're going to have a lot more energy for the others. And you can see energy in a different way. Of course, in the Vipassana tradition that you mentioned, there is a mindfulness of the energy of the body that is slightly different, but each tradition will have something that is quite particular to that tradition, of course. Well, then, we are right within the time given to us. There are some.
Can I ask a question? And it's a little controversial because it comes from the land I come from, where meditation was so exalted and it died. Because it's been very profound discussion, and it's meditation is very spiritually enriching. It takes you to the peace. But as the lady asked, how it helps. Say, as a student in my studies, as a professional, or as a person to live well. This is also sometimes meditation on one hand looks very spiritually, otherworldly. How do I bring it to my benefit in this world, in this materialistic? This is a little bit of doubt in my mind.
Alors, la question est comment...
Well, the question was, how can you... The gentleman is Indian, and how can you bring efficiently the benefits of meditation into your daily life? In summary, if you allow me.
Beyond religion, I mean, religious approach, just to take it as a sport practice. I mean, I know it sounds strange, but if you just take it like a health, you know, il faut le prendre comme
une aide.
Oui, voilà, comme une...
We have to take it as a helping hand to go beyond necessarily the religion point of view. It's just something that you live through, that you have empathy for. And then you nourish yourself from it, and then you can nurture the others, and that enables you to learn more. And we're not really into the religious straitjacket anymore.
To help us to be the best we can within our condition. La méditation.
Meditation is the best way, in a certain way, to respond more creatively in our circumstances. If you're a doctor, that will help us to be a better doctor. We don't want to construct robots, but that means that we're going to be more ourselves. So if you're a sports person, myself, I was for 10 years long, I was cleaning floors. So meditation helped me to improve my cleaning through meditation. Marion Cotillard was saying that yesterday. Meditation can help us to be in a situation as it is and to react to it in a creative way. And the rest of the conference, I think, is going to talk about that, how we can bring a meditation in a daily life, how can we bring meditation in an economic way. I'm working for the moment with OAPs and how you can physiologically help the elderly, but also in their own way that they look at themselves and they look at the others, but in their daily life. Well, anyway, something is very sure is that meditation is very interesting to a lot of people, and good news is that it brings some good results. The bad news is that you have to continue doing it, because of course we change every single day, so that meditation will be different every single day. Thank you very much anyway. I thank you very much for your listening to us. Thank you so much, and I hope you continue well on this conference.